Today we are honored to have in our studio Glenn Mallery. Glenn is a hero of World War II, served in many different places overseas, and we're going to have a chat with Sergeant Mallery and just give you a little bit of insight as to what he accomplished and all of the places that he went, the things that he saw during World War II. Welcome. We are so glad to have you here in our studio. We're so honored to have you, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. I was only too glad to do it.
Well, you know, that's what all of the World War II heroes that I've ever chatted with, they all say, oh, you know, shucks, it wasn't anything. I just did my job. But well, we know that you did much more than your job. You did more than the average bear, as they say. Let's talk about that just a little bit. Now, where did you enter service?
In Clarksburg, West Virginia.
Mm-hmm. And now, what happened to get you into the Army?
I was drafted.
And so you decided that, all right, that was all fine. Did you have a choice as to what your job would be, or did they just assign that to you?
No, they assigned it to me after a period of time.
You went through some testing, I bet,
yes,
and all that. Now, where did you take basic training?
In Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
And that's one of the garden spots of the world.
Yes.
And I know you had a great time out there. Now, when you got to Fort Sill, what did you? Where were you billeted? How were the barracks?
We weren't in barracks. We were stationed up on the hill. We called it the hill in tents.
Uh-huh.
And
that was your first taste of Army life?
First taste of Army life.
Oh, my goodness. And so you were training to be in an artillery unit?
We were trained to be the 105 outfit.
Mm-hmm. 105 millimeter cannons, yes, which were towed, yes, by trucks, basically.
The big trucks, yes.
Right. And now how, in a 105, you were in a battery. How many guns did you have in that battery?
We had 3.
3 guns. So your job then as the supply sergeant was to make sure that all of the pieces were in place and those guns were operational, and as you say, the boys had everything they needed.
And the boys had everything they needed.
And so you then spent your time making sure that they had all the appropriate uniforms, and that they had in the cold weather, they had the cold weather gear, they had rations. And let's talk about that just a little bit. Did you had some help with that? Who was your assistant? I
had a young boy that was, his name, he was a corporal, Peters, mm-hmm, and he helped me occasionally. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot to go when you had to go get 35-gallon cans of water. Mm-hmm. You know, it was a lot of lifting, and all the rations of food you had to get, and he was a big help to when I could get the clothing in for the men. He could help me distribute the clothing, the right stuff to them, mm-hmm,
and everything so ran in triplicate. You had to get all the paperwork in place, and you did that. I bet that was a constant process.
Well,
wasn't it?
It was, but you didn't have a desk where you could go to. You had to do it on the best way you could, on your lap and on your cot.
Back of the truck and, yes, anywhere else you happen to be. Okay, now the reason I ask you about that is because one of the things that we sometimes forget or don't think about is the amount of equipment, the amount of logistics it takes to support a combat unit. And you know, we've heard the saying that it takes 18 men to support one combat soldier. Well, you were the person responsible for supporting not only that combat soldier, but also those other 18 men. They've all got to eat and carry on too. This is a bigger job than people realize.
You know, they don't realize it. The soldier, he used his gas mask for a pillow. Well, when it comes time for a drill, he don't have his gas mask. It's squashed. So what do you have to do?
Get him a new gas mask.
Get him a new gas mask.
That's right.
But he learns the hard way.
That's right. Well, what was the hardest thing to get? What was the most difficult thing to requisition as the supply sergeant?
Well, when it was really bad weather, was getting gloves and was getting combat boots. We didn't have combat boots, you know. It was snow and you had your regular shoes. So we finally did get combat boots, and then I couldn't get gloves, so I would requisition socks so these boys could handle ammunition. And, you know, you can't shoot a carbine with a glove on your hand. So finally, we did get gloves.
Oh.
And we did get combat boots.
It's amazing, though, that in the supply process that some things that you wouldn't normally think about would be so critical, but would be in short supply, like gloves.
Right.
I mean, that, my heavens. Well, okay, you went through basic training, and then you were assigned to a unit. What was the unit?
693rd, no, it was 18th Field Artillery.
Right.
And it was called Battery M, 18th Field Artillery. And we were sent to the main barracks in Fort Sill.
Mm-hmm.
And they were two-story, had a wonderful basement. And
I bet you thought you were in heaven. You were indoors again.
That's where my supply room was. So we had, I had my own private room upstairs, and everybody had their own locker.
Wow.
And their foot locker, and me as supply sergeant, I had the combination of every foot locker, or I mean every wall locker, and I had all the records. And when we had an inspection, if something was missing, some man had lost his shoes and somebody had stole them, why you had to have your last four numbers of your Army number in it. Mine was 8135. So every shirt I had 8135, my shoes, everything. So while they were out in the field, the officer would go with me, and we'd unlock the lockers and see if we could find the shoes.
Do your inspection.
See if somebody's stuff had been stolen, we'd find it.
Okay, so after the 18th, now you were then transferred, or you transferred into a different unit.
They disbanded the 18th Field Artillery. And made us the 693rd Field Artillery.
Right, and so we have a picture of that. You can see there on the screen. Now, tell me, who are these men? What size unit is this, and what are they doing?
That's our 693rd Field Artillery. That's our battery. And all of our officers and all of our men.
And there's a good-looking young man who happened to be in charge of all supplies. That's you, right there in the center of the screen.
There.
You were a staff sergeant.
Yes.
By this time, and so you had progressed very quickly.
Very quickly, yes.
Yep. But it was war, and things were happening, and you were, or getting to be war, and you were preparing then to go overseas by that time.
No, not at that time. At that time, I was sent into a regular Army unit.
Okay.
And these were all soldiers that had been in there for years, for quite a few years. Then you could join the Army, and for raping somebody, and you join the Army, you get out of it.
Instead of going to prison.
Instead of going to prison. So we were in with all these regular Army men, and there was only two of us sent there. And they didn't like us too well.
I'm sure.
And so they didn't like. We had a little education, high school, and graduated, and so that's why I went up the ladder so fast. That the supply sergeant was there. He did a little requisitioning for shoes and pants and shirts, and he lived off the post, so he's kind of peddling on the side. So
an old story. That's an old story. Yes, sir.
So
okay, so you were in this unit, and then what happened?
We turned in to be a school troop. We trained men to be an officer, and we from there. Well, we trained men from other countries. And then we went into making training films. And we made training films with Fox, Paramount, and Metro Golden Mare, and that was quite a thrill. They were wonderful men to work with, and after we make one film, of course, it was a big party.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we all enjoyed.
What were the training films about?
You would go out and you would dig a hole and you'd put some gunpowder in it and show the men retreating or running, and they'd blow that up, and it showed them firing the guns and
Mm-hmm. Just training, basically.
Just all training.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, then what happened? This about the time the war broke out, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So
And
what happened then?
From there, they took us out of Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and sent us to Desert Center.
Mm-hmm.
And there we thought we were going to the Pacific.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we took our training in Desert Center. And after that, let's see, we went from there to New York. And we were sent to the wrong place in New York, so we had to pack up again, load, and go to another before we went overseas.
Uh-huh. Talk about going overseas. What happened now?
Oh, man. I was trying to get everything settled with my men. And I hadn't had any sleep for about 2 days. And when I got on a ship, I had 5 men that I got them their guns, their carbines. And it was still in Cosmo. They had to clean them. And I was put in charge of the PX, selling cigarettes for the men. And then I got sick, and with a bad cold, and we ended up in Le Havre.
Uh-huh.
And from Le Havre, that's when we took boats, and I can't figure out. I've laid there and thought about where these boats went down these channels, and there was other boats sitting there with clotheslines and people living in these boats,
Uh-huh.
and I can't figure out where it was, what part of the country it was. I just can't get it back in my mind.
So you went inland, though, at that point.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Then we went into a town called Pembroke
Mm-hmm.
in England, and that was south of Wales. And we were stationed they put us up where they were building a new hospital. And the rooms had cinder in them, and the sidewalks of cinder. And we went on maneuvers in Wales. And so we were setting up there, getting everything organized, because we knew that we were going to be going
Mm-hmm.
to cross the channel. So we didn't know when. So we took our training, got all of our guns, everything, all of our supplies, every man fixed in perfect shape, all of his clothing, and we got all that ready. And then we were all enjoying ourselves, and then all at once we got notice to report to camp immediately. And so we were red-balled, they called it red-balled.
Mm-hmm.
And we packed up and got on the boat to cross the channel.
Where did you land?
In the second wave
Mm-hmm.
at
Where did you go ashore?
let me think.
You were in the second wave, which means you were right behind the combat soldiers who went in and had to fight their way ashore.
Yes. Well,
So when you went on shore, What was it like? Was it a little calmer, but you were still being shelled occasionally?
Well, no,
on the
we
second
were
wave?
lucky. We didn't get shelled. We went in, when we crossed the channel, we had blimps on cables above all of.
To keep the German aircraft from attacking you.
So we landed, and they took us immediately into a bivouac area. And so we could get orientated. You know, the guns were all treated. We had the trucks were all
That's
treated.
right, because you'd had them on water. You had to, get them all set up so the salt water wouldn't.
Of course, the big thing was communication.
Right.
And so you had to get that all set up.
Right.
And they thought that we didn't have sights for our 105s. So they were going to make us an MP unit. Until
why would they send you across the channel if you didn't have everything? I mean, whose bright idea was that?
We don't know. But anyhow, I got a phone call, and they said, Sergeant Mallery, don't our guns have sights? I said, yeah. And I said, I even have an extra one. So that changed the subject.
But you weren't supposed to have an extra one,
no,
probably,
I wasn't,
were you?
but
You were a good supply sergeant. You had an extra. So what did you tell him when he said, how did you get an extra one?
Since I knew the guys at ordnance. So,
and that's pretty clever, though, because you never know when that's going to become a problem.
So we were stationed in there for a while, and then one day he says, okay, we're going to take you up front to let you see what's going on. So we took us part way, and then we got off and we went through the hedgerows and seeing what the doughboys were doing. And they kind of give you a little taste of what was happening.
See what was happening at the front lines.
Put the fear of God in you.
Yes.
So after that, then we says we're going to war. So we did, and we helped St. Lo. We helped take St. Lo. And in St. Lo, it was, these Germans were dug in big foxholes in the hedgerows, and they had mattresses in there, and they had the French girls.
Shocking.
So, after we got St. Lo, took it, the French people took some of the women and stripped them off naked and ran them down the street. And they were throwing tomatoes and stones at the girls. And here we are, they're throwing roses at us.
Well, they liked you, no question about that. They were glad you were there.
So we were on our way then.
There we go. Okay, now from St. Lo, where did you go?
Oh, golly.
All the way in. I mean, you wound up in Germany at the end of the war, of course.
Oh, yes.
But were you with General Patton's army by this time?
No, we were the First Army.
First Army, okay. Because your battery, or your battalion, I should say, operated as sort of an independent force.
Yes.
Did not? You were sort of a troubleshooter.
We were a troubleshooter, and we never knew from where we were going to be from one day to the next.
Didn't that make your supply job pretty hard?
Well, it did to a certain extent, but once we got settled down and it was firing, then I could go to each unit gun and check with the man, see what he needed, and but they didn't run out of clothes too soon. But some of them didn't care. So
well, but things like, as you said, handling that ammunition without gloves in very cold weather, that must have been real painful. And so it was pretty clever of you to put socks on their hands.
But we had one group of boys. That's all they did. They took care. They were ammunition boys. They knew when they say white phosphorus shells, they would get white phosphorus, or they get armor piercing. So that was their job.
And you had a pretty clever way, because the guns firing in the mud especially, they tend to move around, and the first thing you know, you might be shooting at the wrong target. How did you keep them from doing that?
They just kept the gun sights.
Yeah, but you put like a log behind.
Oh, we had a log. They carried a log on each truck, and sometimes two, because one log would go, and then and they'd put that in the ground behind the gun, so when it fired, it wouldn't dig back in the ground and throw it off balance.
Probably didn't learn that at Fort Sill because there wasn't enough rain to make mud. Well, okay, so you moved then as an independent force, and you were as an artillery unit, though you were pretty close to the front lines all the time.
We were,
and then the lines kind of got blurred because the Germans didn't know what was going on. You actually ran into some Germans from time to time.
they'd come out of the woods. You didn't know where they were. They were disrupted. They didn't know where they were going. And it's like General Hodges said. He came up to our commanding officer. He says, "You're not a doughboy troop. You are a 105 outfit. You're supporting these boys. So don't get your boys up here with the doughboys.
Do what you're supposed to do,
So,
which is be the
see, we
sport
were
unit."
just starting.
Yeah.
And we had to learn the hard way. And it's the same way at night. We learned the hard way. We had bed check Charlie come at 11 o'clock every night. And that was a pilot, single pilot. So what did we do? We'd open fire on him, and that was the wrong thing, because he'd leave and come back and bring all of his buddies.
Yeah, he knew where you were. He was
knew,
looking. Yeah,
So he'd.
He was looking for you, wasn't he?
Yes. So we learned the hard way. Don't shoot at him.
Don't shoot him. He was just out there looking for you. Well, all right. So you were close enough to the lines that sometimes the Germans were wandering into your area. You actually had to dispatch one night. Tell us about that.
Well, we were lucky. We got into a place, and lucky there's a barn there. And First Sergeant and I, we decided, we're going to sleep inside. So we got in the barn, and I kept saying, I said, Boy Scout, call him Boy Scout, and I said, Boy Scout, there's somebody here. No, you're not. I said, there's somebody here. And finally I said, there he is. And we both shot. And I got one, and he got one.
Wow.
So
I bet that was a little scary.
It was made your hair stand up.
I'm sure.
And it taught you a lesson, be on the alert.
Be on the alert. Well, then, so all of this was going on, and you were moving up from time to time. You rarely knew where you were going to sleep the next day,
You
for
didn't
heaven's
know.
sakes.
You didn't know.
And you also, one of the things you didn't know is where you're going to bathe.
No.
Where did you take a bath, for heaven's sakes, out there in the field?
In your steel helmet.
Now, how did that work?
Well, I'll tell you, it's like the battery commander asked Corporal Matthews, says, how do you take a bath in that helmet? He says, sir, he says, I'll tell you. He says, I wash down as far as possible. I wash up as far as possible. Then he says, I wash possible. And I thought my battery commander, Captain Walsh, was going to faint. He laughed so hard.
That's a great story.
But when he came to the Seine River, or any river, you could see the men running and stripping their clothes off, getting a bath. Or if they seen a tank sitting there and he had water in his helmet, he'd run over to that tank and put it up that
the exhaust pipe. Yes.
and get the water in his helmet.
And it'd warm it up enough
warm
that
it
you
up
could at least...
so it could get a little warm.
Shaving must have been miserable in cold water.
You shaved in cold water. You did that in the desert. You had no hot water. And every night you had to take a shower in the desert, and it was cold. And they check you in and check you out.
Yeah. You know, one of my very favorite cartoons from World War II that Bill Malden did was when Willie and Joe had their Jeep, and they were getting ready to take the water out of the radiator to bathe in it, and Willie says to Joe, he says, run her up the hill one more time, she's not warm enough yet. But that's exactly what you all did. I mean, any place you could find to take a bath.
Take a bath, you did. It was a little creek, you had a chance, you did it.
What were the locals like when you were certainly you're in France? They were loving you all the time.
Well, some did.
Some did. Well, what was all that like?
Well, some of them was real nice, and others, they were cold.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you're in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And,
They've probably seen enough war to go around, don't you imagine?
Yes.
That's probably true. But now, what was it like as you moved further in?
the Germans, a lot of them, they didn't want the war. They didn't, and they would treat you wonderfully.
Mm-hmm.
And if they could do anything for you, they do it.
You know, that's and that's an interesting story that as a conquered enemy, sometimes they treated American soldiers better than the French did.
Yeah.
And that's still today is a little disconcerting, but it's true. Okay, so you weren't, your unit was pulled out before the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah.
So you were pretty lucky there.
Yes.
But it was still a very cold winter.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that was one of the coldest winters of the war. Now, where were you when the Battle of the Bulge was on? Where was your unit pulled out to? Do you remember? I know it all runs together, kind of, but
I don't remember.
but you were where it was cold, weren't you?
Yes.
Well, okay. Moving after the Battle of the Bulge, you all continued to move towards Germany and into Germany, and so let's talk about towards the end of the war now. Where did you all end the war? Where were you in 45? In May of 45?
In the war, we ended up in Salzburg, Austria.
Not a bad place to be, I guess.
Beautiful, beautiful country.
And so, what was it like when you got the message that the war was over?
Oh, we all we were stationed in some barracks in the woods. It was a beautiful, just like a park in Austria, and we had a cellar there that we turned Corporal Peters over because he had worked at Fort Pitt Brewery.
Mm-hmm.
He was our brewmaster. So we went to the brewery and got kegs of beer, and it was open from in the evenings until 10 o'clock. And you could take your old canteen cup and go over and drink beer in the park.
I'm shocked to hear that American soldiers would be drinking.
After the war, we did. And we had a good time in that little park.
Well, you know, you think you kind of earned it, don't you?
And yes, and oh yeah, I want to go back. It's just brought a story to me.
Okay.
We were fighting with Patton in France, and we could have taken Paris. We could have helped take it, and they pulled us back and says, "No, go and bivouac. The French are going to take Paris."
Right.
And Patton, there was a cognac factory there, and Patton said everybody gets a bottle of cognac. And we had one guy stole a Jeep. He went and wrecked it. And one guy played Tarzan, fell out of a tree and broke his back.
Oh no!
So, to show you how Patton was, he thought of his men.
That's great. Got everybody a bottle of cognac. Oh, how
So
fun!
everybody got drunk.
Oh, I bet they did.
Oh.
Well, now at the end of the war, and as you look back, but let's talk about what happened right after that. Now, your enlistment was ending. You were coming up on the end of your time,
Yes.
were you not? What now? Didn't they offer you some time to stay in and a promotion?
I was sent from Battery B to Headquarters Battery.
Uh-huh.
And I said, oh boy, I'm getting a promotion now to Master Sergeant. So they said yes. So before I could get my Master Sergeant, orders came through for me to report to Frankfurt. So I was sent to Frankfurt to G5 Industry Branch. And I was laying there on my old straw bunk with straw mattress. And I was sent out to inspect factories, see how badly they were destroyed and what their fuel consumption was and all that stuff. So I went to a shoe factory and had me a pair of shoes made and a briefcase made.
All right.
And so they called me one day. It says, come to the office. So I went to the office, and they says, you're going to Heidelberg. And I says, what I'm going to do in Heidelberg? And says, the Grand Hotel has to be set up in offices for the Army. And that's what I'm going to do there. And they said, you're going to get the supplies. So I went back, and they gave me a Jeep for me and 2.5-ton truck and a driver. And I went back to there, and I met Captain Matthews, and he told me what I had to do, and he says, you're sleeping in the back here, your quarters are there, and there'll be a man, and I forget their name, a German couple. They will take care of your room. You don't have to make your bed or anything. They'll keep it, everything. Mm-hmm. And he says, here's your meal ticket. You will eat at this restaurant downtown, and your driver will keep his truck over at the base. So I says, what am I going to do? And he says, he says, you can do some night requisitioning.
Now, what is that, for those who might not know?
I said, well, what am I going to do? And he says, you have champagne and cognac. And he says, you have a lock on your truck in the back bin. Now he says, you can go night requisitioning. I was okay. So he said, you can take your Jeep and let him bring the truck. So I went night requisitioning. And I got typewriters, I got desk, I got carpeting, I set up the main lobby downstairs with nice chairs, and
just a little bit of trade here and a little bit of trade there.
A little bit of that, and I would be gone maybe 2 days. But when it come time, I got my orders to leave, and I said, I'm going. He says, Captain Matthews says, Sergeant Mallery says, tomorrow you go down. If you'll stay just 3 months, go down tomorrow and you'll be a senior warrant officer. I said, I don't want it. I said, I've had enough. I said, I've been away 4.5 years. I said, I've been home 2 times in 4.5 years. And I says, I want out. So I decided, I said, get me out. So I left.
They processed out, and you were on your way home.
Processed on my way home, and I got into Fort George Meade, Maryland, for my discharge, and they gave me my mustering out pay. It was $300 or something, I forget, and a bus ticket, which was $19.50 to Wheeling. And I get in a town called Washington, Pennsylvania. And a bus driver says, everybody off. I said, no, I'm going on to Wheeling. He's not on this bus or any other one. He says, we're on strike. I said, how am I supposed to get to Wheeling? He says, don't ask me, soldier. It's not my worries. So here I am out there at hitchhiking. So I finally got a ride, some gentleman from Cleveland, Ohio, picked me up and took me to the bridge across the Ohio River in Wheeling and let me out. It's 10th Street. And I walked from 10th Street to 22nd Street to the YMCA and finally got in to sleep a while.
Oh my, bless your heart.
And nobody knew I was coming home. And when I left, my mother's hair was almost as black as this. When I come home, as white as that.
Wow.
So
she worried about you a lot during the war.
well, I
no
was,
question. All the mothers did.
there was 5 of us boys, and all of us were in the service. The last boy, they wouldn't draft him, so he joined the reserves. Then there was 2 of us overseas, and my brother was a rear echelon soldier, and I was the only one on the front lines.
Wow.
My other brother was a CB, and the other one was a medic.
Well, you all had great service then.
So we all had our service. So
congratulations.
that was the end of my.
Well, after the war, you had several wonderful jobs, a great career, a great life. But let's talk about one particular job that was kind of interesting. You worked for Bob Hope for a while. Tell us about that.
Excuse me. Well, I saw this ad in the paper. Wanted salesman to open Wheeling and surrounding territories. So that sounds interesting. So I went home. I got my best suit out, shined up my shoes, and got all dressed up. I said, I'm going to go. And I got a haircut, and I went in to look at my best. As my mother always said, you're out as a salesman, go dressed like you're a millionaire if you don't have nothing. Have clean clothes.
She was a smart woman.
Clean clothes, shine shoes, shaved, good haircut. So I went and I was interviewed, and they chose me. So
now, what did you do?
I opened up Wheeling territory, surrounding area, and they sold nothing but prime and choice beef and other items for the restaurant.
This is Bob Hope's company.
Bob Hope's company, he and his brother.
And so you actually got to meet him and interact with him. Tell us about that.
I was Bob Hope's guest at Penn State, and I went to the chancellor's house with Bob Hope as his guest. And I was his guest at West Virginia University. As a matter of fact, his brother gave me all of Bob's programs. And he says, now go there and give the students the job of selling the programs instead of the concession stand.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, give each one of the boys 10 cents a copy. And he said, I'll give you 10 cents a copy. I said, oh, I'll take that. So I was there as his guest, and I was his guest at Ohio State University.
Wow.
At the Ohio State Fair.
Mm-hmm.
And he and Lou Rawls.
Oh, man.
And I met Bob at Fred's house, Uncle Fred we call him. And Bob was there with Dolores, and he'd cook steaks and sing, he and Dolores.
What was he like?
He was a gentleman. There'll never be another man in this world. He was a serviceman's friend. He couldn't do enough for a serviceman, and he thought the world and all of me because I never got to see him overseas. We always got a march order and didn't get to see him. And he always just shook my hands and thanked me for what I did. But he could tell some jokes, I tell you.
He was quite a man, but he also had a very strong interest in how well you did with his company. Talk to us about that a little bit.
They took myself and my ex and my 2 children to this fancy restaurant, and they wanted me to be sure that my family agreed with my salary and what I was going to do.
Mm-hmm. And
I was going to get paid commission and so much mileage and all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a small car, and like Uncle Fred says, Glenn, he says, you can't haul these nice people over here in that little car. He says, go get you new. And I said, Uncle Fred, that's us. He says, I'm going to give you extra money for mileage.
Sweet.
And he gave me extra money for mileage, and I made one big sale. And what did Uncle Fred do? He sent me a separate check for opening this big account, and that his nephew couldn't open. And when he tried to open up with him, and I went to the bank to cash that check, and they didn't want to. Oh, I wouldn't cash that. I'd keep that. Money's money.
Money in my pocket.
But Bob Hope was a great man.
Oh.
I have a cigarette lighter from Bob Hope, and they just couldn't treat me.
Oh, that's great. Well, this afternoon we've been chatting with Glenn Mallery, a hero of World War II. Thank you, sir, for coming in to see us, and God bless you, and congratulations on a wonderful life, and thank you for your service.
I served with pride and was only too glad to do it.